Hello, everyone, and welcome to our discussion today on the public engagement for archaeologists, the new toolkit by the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists. We all know that archaeology has an amazing power to bring people together and transform lives, but are we making the most of it? Public engagement is core to our profession. As expressed within the Code of Conduct and the Social Value Model, engaging communities improves our work and creates wide-ranging public benefits, including improved well-being, community pride, social inclusion, educational outcomes, and much, much more. Yet is still too often treated as an afterthought or a tick-box exercise, given too few resources to make a real impact, or it's absent completely from big development and infrastructure projects. When it comes to public engagement, our biggest challenge isn't just who we engage or how programs are delivered. It's the way archaeological work is procured in the first place. In this event today, our panelists will discuss CIfA's new Archaeology Public Engagement Toolkit and how we can use it to get better and more meaningful public engagement commissioned across all types of archaeological projects. Today's event is meant to begin and encourage practical use of the toolkit, not to discuss the theory or politics about public engagement in archaeology or any of the other concerns for the profession. So we will be accepting questions today around the use of the toolkit specifically. So to introduce myself, I am Lisa Westcott-Wilkins, the founder and co-CEO of Dig Ventures. For those of you who don't know Dig Ventures, we were founded to encourage participation in archaeology and heritage projects by pioneering the use of crowdfunding, crowdsourcing, and digital methods to increase access and opportunities. So our panelists today will be Dr. Sadie Watson, research fellow and archaeologist, researching public benefit and social value in developer-funded archaeology at the Museum of London Archaeology, funded by UKRI and AHRC. Also joining us today is Bruce Mann, Senior Historic Environment Officer for Aberdeenshire Council and author of ELGEO's guidance on the delivery of public benefit and social value in the planning process. Dr. Amanda Forster is also here, who is the Chief Operating Officer for Dig Ventures, and Amanda led on the actual research and production of the toolkit on behalf of CIfA and the SIG. We are also joined by Jessica Lowther, the community archaeologist for Headland Archaeology and chair of the CIfA Special Interest Group in Community Archaeology. We have a few things on the plate today to discuss, including a vision for the future of public engagement in archaeology, why changing the way it is positioned in the commissioning and procurement processes is crucial, how CIfA's new public engagement toolkit can help us do it, and practical examples of how to use the toolkit. And we will also be holding time for some Q&A. We hope it will be a practical and useful discussion with lots of practical takeaways so that we can all begin to contribute to creating bigger and more sustainable future for public engagement in archaeology. So before we get started, we just have a quick note on housekeeping. There will be a Q&A at the end, so please submit your questions in the chat and they'll be picked up and we'll answer those towards the end. Please keep the chat friendly and constructive. We do have a virtual bouncer who will be looking for any trolls or disruptive comments. And also, please do be patient if we have any tech hiccups or wandering cats or other pets in and out of the screen. We'll do our best to get it back online as quickly as we can. So, before we begin, we just sort of wanted to understand how many of you may have already had a look at the toolkit. We're going to pop the link to the document actually in the chat just now. So go ahead and click on that if you haven't had a chance to read it already. And I think we'll just crack into the first question, guys. And I think starting at the beginning is probably a good place, and because public engagement is such a huge topic, and we all know we've been discussing this forever and ever within the profession. So I think starting at the beginning, let's understand a little bit about the vision for the toolkit and how it can help us all to have a positive impact on the future of public engagement archaeology. So Amanda, over to you. What was the vision?
Oh, big question. So the vision is something that I think Jessica will speak to as well. But really for us, when we kind of picked up the project, we were looking around what can this toolkit do to help us move the public engagement forward. And what we found out really early on, just through looking at consultation, survey, talking to peers and colleagues, is that it's really difficult to have a positive impact when you've no resources, there's not much guidance out there, it's even harder if there's no budget, and it's even worse if nobody wants you to do it because they're not asking you to do it. So, what the toolkit does in terms of that starting point and that positive impact is it's trying to create the opportunity for archaeologists, whether you're in procurement, whether you're commissioning, or whether you're designing projects and responding to planning requirements, for example. It's to provide the opportunity so that we can make it happen and that we can respond to that as well. So, in terms of helping us have that impact, what we hope is that the toolkit will provide all the information you need around the site to do that and a bit of a path through it. I think that's my response to that.
Well, there's certainly a lot to unpack there, and I think you're right. We definitely also want to hear from Jessica as the chair of the SIG who initiated this project. What motivated the SIG to go for it, and what was the ambition for the toolkit?
Well, the project brief for the development of the toolkit really came out of a couple of needs that were identified. So in 2021, the SIG did a survey of local planning authority archaeologists to understand the challenges of commissioning and developing and delivering community engagement in developer-led archaeology. And that key finding from that was that community engagement was seen as an add-on. It wasn't something that was embedded in practice, but additionally, as well as practitioners on the delivery of community engagement that would be proportionate to the work being undertaken. So those are the real instigators for the project brief being designed by the SIG.
I think what you've just said there is really important. It's about proportionality to the size of the development. Some of you listening might think, well, I'm just doing a little watching brief. Like, really, do I need to do public engagement on that? And if so, what would it look like and why? So those kinds of issues, proportionate and also meaningful, what makes public engagement meaningful? Would it be meaningful to do engagement on a watching brief? Well, that's something that the toolkit will help you work through. So I would encourage you all to have a look at those relevant sections and understand, because of course we recognize there are cost and time implications to all of that. So in the perfect world where public engagement is part of the commissioning process, both in terms of from the local government side and the developer side, it's recognized, etc. That's what we want to move towards. So our next question, top two, is why do we need to change the perception in the commissioning process, or what are the ingredients of that? So on this question, we're going to hear from both Sadie and Bruce from different angles. So Sadie, why don't you kick us off?
So I think we've already heard a bit of the introduction I'm going to talk about, really. I think the sector's moved on so much, and we're fully understanding the why we need to do better in public engagement now. But what we need to do better, I think, is work out how to tackle the how, because clients that we work with, I work in a contractor organisation, as you mentioned at the beginning, they're still unsure as to how to get the added value potential from archaeology. And we as archaeologists are often unsure as to how to articulate that to them. So the point at which we're commissioned is absolutely crucial to get that in, really, that communication. There are well embedded reasons for this trickiness, but huge opportunities for us to expand the impact of our work. It's going to take work on our part, though, of course, to lever existing new funding sources, to open new collaborations with different teams in client bodies, perhaps, and to use new language, which is why the toolkit's useful, because it provides that new language we can use to talk to people, to explain the value of archaeology. Wait until we're on site, as we all know, is too late, because by then we're a groundwork contractor like many others. So getting in at the point of commissioning is really critical.
Yeah, there are sections within the toolkit for those listening that talk about, the project management cycle of, how developments get planned, and where in that cycle we should, as archaeologists, be saying, look, this is where you should be talking about us. This is when you should be talking about us. And these are the many different ways that you can get value out of planning archaeology at that project initiation stage. I agree. It's that add-on, once we're already on site, it's too late. Like, there's no budgets, there's no time, there's no point, really. So reading through the toolkit will help you understand those project life cycles and who the players are actually within the developments and within local government that you need to go to initiate those conversations. So with that note, let's go to a player in local government. Bruce, what's your perspective on this question?
Oh, it's one of starting off with a position of guilt, because I think on behalf of all my colleagues, we've been we recognize the importance of all this additional public engagement, but too often it's been expected as a freebie, an add-on after the process, as you say, and that's wholly unfair on the profession and it needs to be embedded right from the start, as we've been touching on. The wider view that we have as well is that as a profession, we all understand what we do in terms of the archaeology and what we find and the stories it tells. The importance of that is cannot be underestimated. However, we, as in the local government side of things, regularly encounter the question of why, and it's everyone outside of the profession still perhaps sees it as a luxury item or something akin to dealing with contaminated land on a development site, something as horrific as that. And we need to be better at just getting back to the narrative of what we do is important, and you do that by telling as many people as possible and involving them in it, and we also can learn from them as well. So from our perspective, there is no downside to this apart from, yes, it is another additional piece of work that has to be done on the site. It's all about being proportionate with it on that site, but there are ways of doing it, and as long as it's resourced from the start, fantastic.
And so what do you think that Algeo and other local government archaeologists will be able to do with the toolkit? How is it usable for people on your end of the commissioning and procuring process? Are there aspects of it that you feel like will help others in your role to then go to developers or to other, people commissioning archaeology and say, look, this is really what you need to be thinking about?
Yeah, we are always mindful we have to provide a level playing field for everyone, and this toolkit provides that straight off. It gives confidence for those who are unsure of how to go about what is quite, at the end of the day, quite a large concept. But it means that we can point to the same set of resources, the same guidance, and say, this is what we're talking about, this is the why, off you go. Embed it in the front, and then we can also then monitor it from that point forward as well, where we can turn. And I think the critical thing in terms of people like myself within the process, we can turn this from a nice to have into this has to happen. And with this toolkit, that gives hopefully all of my colleagues a confidence to be able to do that, and we can force through the necessary changes.
So I'm going to put you on the spot for a minute while I've got you.
Yeah.
Moving from a nice to have to this has to happen, there are still some commercial archaeologists out there who don't believe it does have to happen on these sites, So from your perspective, and Sadie, you might want to chime in here as well, why do you think it is so important to have the public engagement embedded in the commercial context? What I've heard is, that's what the community projects are for. Let's keep them separate. We can't possibly include public engagement out of commercial projects. And certainly from my perspective, that's the bulk of the work that happens. So if we don't tackle it and get public engagement added in commercial projects, then we're not going to get the scale that we need for this kind of work. So I'd like to hear both of you respond to that as well. Why is it important?
I think every time where it has happened in the past, if I dive in first, Sadie, and then you can contradict it from that, but it's the engagement has been overwhelming. So there are different streams to this. If you're setting up a project for a start, there are so many lost opportunities currently by not speaking to the local communities. So if you think in terms of desk-based assessments, the additional added information that can be gained from just speaking about the local landowners, the people who have lived there, to understand what's happened on that site is immense, and we're missing a trick. We also should be better than just recording the upstanding remains, the features, etc. It is also linking that into the contemporary stories and all the social history elements of that as well, because that's what makes these sites important within a local context. And I will always go back to a pit that is perhaps one of many across the UK falls into obscurity within the academic literature. However, if that pit can tell you a local population as to who was living in that area, what they were up to as a snapshot in time, it makes it incredibly relevant to how they live and how they connect to that place as well. So that element, I think we are missing a trick on at the moment. But also, if we don't get this right, the focus on the wider picture is all about well-being, community wealth creation, and the economic pressures from there, as well as things like climate change. Obviously, we can never escape from that element. But archaeology plays into all of those factors. we do it as a profession relatively well in the background. We just need to be better at making those connections across and then doing it as standard. And that is important, because without doing that and shouting about the good work that everyone does and the potential of the stories and the contributions it makes, we will lose the support and makes our jobs then even more difficult.
100%. Sadie, anything to add?
Not really, Bruce. That was a brilliant response. You've covered it brilliantly.
Mic drop.
What I would say, because I'm not a curatorial archaeologist, so I can say this, is
Yeah.
that the professional definitions of things like significance, as Bruce alluded to with his pit example, rarely match the definitions of significance that locals would have. So we need to remember that what we think is worthy of showing people might not be what they think they want to look at. So that I always remember that. Think about that when I work behind hoardings and people can't look in. And actually, archaeology to all of us is a noun as well. It is a verb as well as a noun, right? So we do archaeology. People want to experience it. They want to come and watch us doing it. They want to feel and smell and hear and touch archaeology, as well as read about it and hear about the results much later on, once it's all been dug up and removed from the site where it was found. So I think that the whole idea of engaging in the process of archaeology is a really critical part of our profession that so far we've kind of abandoned wholesale with the professionalisation and the construction sector obligations on health and safety and all those things, which are, of course, important, but absolutely we can get around these things. And we have done on all kinds of complicated sites in London, including mass burial grounds and all sorts. So I would absolutely, I argue about this a lot, because there are many ways of providing engagement on really complicated projects. And I think we should do far more of it.
Totally agree again, Sadie. And I think that's an important point made by both, is that, what are the outcomes of providing public engagement are sometimes impossible to quantify. We have to have targets. It has to be a part of the plan, but equally you have to just allow the space for individuals and communities to have their own experiences. And those are going to intersect with a lot of the sort of integrated funding approaches that are happening now that support work in communities that, might not just be strictly archaeological. There's funding coming for green responses, for climate stuff, for well-being, for cohesion, and archaeology should be in front of all of those if we're going to be a truly 360 funded and present in community life type of sector. So excellent points. So I think now, Amanda, it might be time to talk about what the toolkit actually is. We keep talking about it, but what is it and how does it look? Why don't you walk us through the documents?
Yeah, and I think it's important as well just to kind of distill all of the conversations so far and the kind of keywords: procure, commission, deliver, evaluate. What we've tried to do in the toolkit is cover all of those bases, especially to audiences that are in those kind of early stages. So it's really aimed at those two key audiences in terms of project commissioners or advisors, but also the archaeology design team and delivery team. So actually, one of the early things we recognised when we were first talking about the toolkit with the SIG and with our project advisory board was that the toolkit is not for people doing community archaeology already, or the people that are already experts in delivering this. It's to kind of look around the corners and try and get those things in place. So what you can see at the screen at the moment is just a very simple PDF to start with, and this really is downloadable on the toolkit, but what it does is give you a very quick look up at what it is. Because what we also appreciated is that when you go onto the CIfA toolkits and the websites, there's a lot of text and a lot of headlines. So this is really the kind of quick plan as to what is currently in the toolkit and the different sections that it's made up of. So there's three main sections. Public engagement in archaeology is really looking at what that is, what it's the meanings of the words, the types of engagement might be, but also what's public engagement. And when we start hearing terms like social value, what does that mean and why does it come in? The second section is looking at actually making it happen. So that's when we talk about commissioning and procurement, but also planning. This is the place where the levers and the language are. If you have not found it in section 1, then hopefully it will be in section 2. And then finally, in the third section, that's where we look at the design itself. So how do you plan your engagement and the kind of different levels of engagement that might be there. And I think it's already been picked up in the comments as I've been looking, glancing to the side, that not all engagement needs to be flashy, and that's absolutely true. Some engagement could be very, very low level, or some projects you might have recognition early on that actually the engagement or the public dissemination of the project is the report that goes to the HER. Like, these are all reasonable things to do. What we're trying to do is make sure that somebody's thinking of this early on in the project, and that those decisions are made within the context of the project, and the kind of the process itself is thought through. So I've pulled up a few elements of this that I think are useful anyway. So some of it is about understanding our own roles and responsibilities within the process itself, for example, and that's where we've kind of put in text on words how that might look if you're the applicant and developer, or if you're the project team as well. So that kind of understanding of how different people have a role to play within these areas is quite a useful thing to look at. The other thing to notice as well, that within the text-based elements, we've tried to put in as many links as we can to external sources, additional information, other resources, so that there's other places that people can go to as they work through. We look at commissioning, how to commission archaeology, how to commission public engagement with archaeology. So there's a lot of words in this toolkit, but also tying that in with things like social value, as I mentioned earlier, and how different operators within that process might look at proportionality, something that we've talked about a couple of times already. There's links across the toolkit as well, so you can see where we talk about one thing in one section, where that's picked up in another, but also kind of trying to break down some of those questions that you might ask as you go through the process. And I think that helps as well, because it means that we can situate those conversations from our own perspective, but also with an understanding of what questions others might have in the process, or what other people might need answering actually by what we kind of come to wherever we are in the process itself. And then when it comes to planning itself, we talk about audiences, and then we start getting into areas where we have got more resources and further reading as well. So when we start getting into the and now do this moment, we've also included a lot more kind of resources that people can look at. And we've looked outside of the archaeology sector as well, just with that recognition that some aspects that we're talking about, we're quite early on within archaeology projects itself. Finally, we kind of look at the different types of engagements and how you might engage different audiences. But you might be able to see on screen, it might be too small, that we also include some info sheets. So where there's kind of an extra bit of information that we wanted to go into a bit more detail on, we've put that as a kind of an external PDF. One of these isn't quite up yet, which is one that I think is really interesting. So to just kind of step back from the content just for a moment, there was an awful lot of consultation around public engagement in archaeology that had happened already before we got involved in this project. The SIG had done a couple of surveys to bring them to the point of actually deciding this is what needed to be done. But also ahead of that, there was 10 years of surveys with archaeologists responding in different numbers saying, we really want to do this, we already do this, we're skilled at doing this, but we need resources, and the barriers about costs, about time, about language. And that info sheet kind of brings all of that together. So it's actually quite a useful body of evidence, I guess, something that we can hopefully look back on in a few years' time and say, well, that's where we were, and look where we are now. In terms of useful things, so there's a lot of text and language, and I think that's really important. It provides the context and that kind of background that we need. But on a very practical level, we were also very aware of people just saying, well, but how do I do that? A couple of things we've talked about today, evaluation is one of them, and actually providing that meaningfulness to the work that we're doing. And one of the tools that's used all over the globe, in fact, in every different arena, is a theory of change. And we've broken down that kind of approach and how you might use it within an archaeological project. So as well as the text itself, there are some additional areas that kind of provide the actual tools that you might need, so people can go away and adapt them and use them within the context of their own projects or organisations as well. And then the other key tool, I think, which is possibly one of the most important aspects, I think, is the public engagement plan, or the idea of a public engagement plan. And what does that really look like? So this could be something that when you think of it, you just think, oh Christ, they're just asking for another raft of paperwork to go along with the project. But actually, the key word here is proportionality. So that public engagement statement or plan could be a sentence within a WSI or project design, or it could be a raft of paperwork if it needs an audience development plan, for example, or an activity plan and an evaluation framework. So there's a real spectrum here, not only of what public engagement is, but what the framework is that you can work within, and how that's adapted. That's where it really helps to have the kind of from procurement all the way through to delivery, just that consideration at every stage. What should we be doing? How should we be doing it? And how can we document it as part of the process? So what the plan does really is help to put all of those things in place so that we can do public engagement in the same way as we do all the work that we do in archaeology, which is to record it, document it, give people the data and share it as part of the archive. And that's something that we've always done with our projects. So why not do it with public engagement? And I think the very last thing that I just wanted to say, because I've noticed it quite recently, this is part of CIfA's universal standard and guidance for excavation. They've all been recently updated. And as part of that, what you can see here, I can't highlight it very well, but I hope you can you see if I highlight the Q there? But at Q, what you'll see is the requirement. I'll go up to the top here. The following should normally be included in the project design or accompanying documentation. And that includes a tailored statement and plan detailing how public benefit will be delivered, including consideration of the potential for engagement and participation proportionate to the project. And that, to me, is the lever that we all need, because that's going to help Bruce get things into planning projects, and it's going to help us. So hopefully that kind of quick whiz around, there's loads of content in the engagement toolkit, but I think that to me is the really important thing, because it's what we need in order to really start doing this now. So that's the tool.
Excellent, Amanda. Thank you very much. As you can all see, the toolkit is a really in-depth document. And as Amanda mentioned, there was a lot of consultation and research involved even before we got started, but certainly within that project. So before I move on to the next question, I wanted to reflect some of the questions and comments that I'm seeing come up in the chat. Gareth Talbot has said, a big challenge, speaking from a project team perspective, is when the early stages of project development has lacked a consultant to guide the developer and introduce engagement. So Sadie and Bruce, you guys are very close to this. What do you have to say about the role of consultants and how we can be more effective in advocating this particular tool to them?
Well, the most effective public engagement project I've ever worked on in developer-funded archaeology had no consultants at all on it, which is the Bloomberg project, where we, as a contractor, worked very closely with the construction team, Robert McAlpine, and the client, because we had planning conditions, so they had no choice, firstly, but also because we had a really good relationship with them, secondly, which is equally important, probably, actually, at the end of the day. But if I was in that situation now, I would be asking the developer who their neighbourhood liaison team was, who their social value person was, who their community liaison teams were, because they will have all those people in place. And they're the people that you probably could talk to. I mean, as I say, the groundworks people or the land purchasing people are not the people to be talking to about community engagement necessarily, because they will not be interested. They just want you off-site on the right day. So it's about commissioning and speaking to the right people at the right time.
That's a very good point. So for those listening, these big developments, if they've skipped over somehow planning in the public benefit from the archaeological work stage, they will have whole teams. They are required by law to deliver this activity, and they will have whole teams that are looking for ways to work with communities and to deliver that. And that is where archaeology needs to be seen as part of what can help them deliver those outcomes. So if you're on a big development that somehow hasn't planned any engagement through the archaeology, find out what other engagement they're doing and what their neighborhood teams and social value teams are already looking for, and put yourself in the mix there. That's a really good point, Sadie. Thank you. Bruce, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good point, Gareth, that you made in terms of if it's not sort of conditioned or in the WSI document for a start, there's a greater role for the likes of myself and my equivalents to flag these opportunities even before the formal planning application has been submitted. If we're looking at commercial archaeology specifically, we should be and starting to have these conversations going, by the way, you need to speak to the community, this is an opportunity. And then where you've picked up in terms of those projects that do have the neighbourhood engagement officers, etc., and so on, that list that Sadie just went through, they will seize upon yourselves with absolute glee. I cannot emphasize this enough, because you collectively out there have nothing but good news stories. You are finding things that are interesting, that will make the press and put your client in a positive spin, as it were, in front of the general public, and it has other ways of engaging with the public that isn't just about, we're sorry about the noise, we're sorry about the mess, we're sorry about X, Y, and Z. It's going, actually, what are your experiences or memories about this? Did you know about this? This is something new that we've learned. So do not underestimate that even if we've missed a trick at the initial stages, it's not too late. They will look at archaeology as an unbelievable opportunity for them.
Fantastic advice. And Jessica, maybe something for the SIG to think about is, as we move towards dissemination, hopefully in the future, wider dissemination of the toolkit, let's not forget consultants and other people who are in the middle of the process, maybe not on either end, are a really important market for this one. I know there's lots of conversations happening already, but it's good to be reminded. So our next question is really around, how will each of you use the toolkit? How do you think it'll be helpful to you in your work? And Jessica, I'd like to come to you first, but we'll hear from all the other panelists as well. So what's your perspective? Give us an example of how you and others in the SIG or in your field might use the toolkit.
I mean, I think the SIG, like you said, is really looking forward to helping promote the toolkit, and that's really where we can provide, help in that and encouraging others to utilize it for guidance. And like you're saying about the consultancy, I did this yesterday, so I shared the toolkit. I was at the All Energy Expo in Glasgow yesterday, and an archaeological consultant came up to our stand to ask about community engagement, because I had presented on community engagement earlier, and they were like, how do we get it out there? How do we convince our clients to do it? How can we say that they should be embedding that? And I was like, well, have you heard about this CIfA toolkit that's just come out? And I showed him how to find it, and I said, have a look at the guidance in there. There's lots of practical examples. There's lots of things you can do. So I think really being able to share that the toolkit out there with our community archaeology SIG group and the wider membership, and I think the most useful part for me, I think you asked as well, was that it provides different types of engagement. It assesses the strengths of each one as well. So you've got, passive and active engagement and dissemination versus, actively getting involved. And that can really ensure that engagement is embedded across all projects proportionate to the works, like those small watching briefs and like those little jobs that people think, oh, it's just we're only going to be on site for a week. It doesn't really matter. To the local community that you're in, it does matter. It does matter that you're there, and they do want to know what you're doing and what's going on. And it's specifically really good for that for developer-led projects, and telling your client team that I'm not looking to have a full-scale community excavation with 100 volunteers. I'm just looking to involve the local community in the work that's happening.
Excellent. Okay, Bruce, what are your thoughts?
Carrot, stick, probably stick. I will use it as a stick to be to make this all happen. It's great because I've mentioned it before. It ensures a level starting point, level field for everyone trying to do this piece of work, and therefore we can carefully reference it. Amanda, thank you for pointing out the guidance reference in terms of the project design should include this. We need to link it within WSIs. As with everything, a written scheme of investigation will only go so far, because geniuses that we all are, we don't necessarily know what's buried underneath the ground until we dig it up, and therefore it's then about how we reference it again successfully within any recommendations that come afterwards, whether that's within the DSR or the post-excavation side of things. That there's a legacy element to this that we're looking for. So we should be able to look to revisit this document multiple times through a process. Then the other part of it, the section, I think it's 1.3, what type of engagement and for whom. I like that part of the start of the conversation, and I'll always sort of think about this as you could be standing in a peat bog in the middle of the Highlands somewhere, and you're sort of looking around going, where's my audience? They're several miles away, and there aren't that many of them. How's that relevant to what I'm doing here versus a trench in central London, where you're probably got too many people tripping by and so on. These are extremes, but it's not, in each case, it's about thinking about what story you're telling. Yes, it might be a watching brief and nothing is found, but you can still explain why it happened in the first place, why it's important to check. And it might just be a single social media post, a short little story around what you're doing from there, even just a little bit of who you are, how you've arrived at that point, and the story behind it is all part of the engagement of why we're doing it and making people understand. I mean, I'm still encountering a generation of individuals out there in terms of the general public who understand geophysics because of Time Team. And we should not forget that people are genuinely interested in all of this stuff. So, and in terms of audience as well, something else I'd always say, things like secondary schools are always tricky to engage with because they have a complicated curriculum that's already in place. Primary schools, they love a day out. They love to engage with it, and the kids absolutely love archaeology without fail. So there's things there that are tricks you can get. Sees what's the local primary school, the nearest public school, primary school to where you're at. The other thing is also the traditional type of stuff. Even if it's an open day on site or a visit, someone think about the audience. Are you working in an area where they can even afford public transport fare to get to where you're at? Therefore, perhaps the simplest thing you could do is actually pay for a bus that can go around, fully advertised, flyers, etc. through doors. Meet at this point. We'll take you to the site and explain what's going on and return it from there. There are lots of tricks to what's going on, and I think this document, in terms of this type of engagement with the audience and that, it is designed to be a conversation. This is, not something that's set in stone. This is where we start now, and I want to emphasize that from my point of view. I'm on a very steep learning curve along with the rest of you as well. I want to hear feedback from yourselves and how we can do things better each and every time. So.
Well, hopefully we'll have some good questions in the chat as well, so we can start that feedback soon. Sadie, any reflections on that as well? How do you think this will be useful in the tendering and design stages that you're normally involved with?
I was looking at it, and we're archaeologists, and archaeologists love to follow a process and a procedure. So I feel like those bits are going to be most useful for us in terms of setting out the stages that we need to go through in order to get to the end result that we want, really. And it's prosaic, and it's kind of standardizing more innovation perhaps, but we know that that's how things get done, right? So in setting out a system that we can all follow and a process that we understand, I think is really helpful, because we've talked about this a lot over the years, all of us on this call, and to have a process written down that we can all follow equally is really useful. There's one particular info sheet that Amanda didn't show. I think it's number 2 that has the WSI and the sections that you can insert stuff into, which I think is really useful. And then more relating to the research that I've been doing is a bit about the wider context and how we fit into social value procurement and all that kind of thing. There's a huge amount of money, as you said earlier, Lisa, floating around in construction that we're not currently targeting or responding to, and I feel like we're missing a big trick. So if we can persuade clients that we can respond to those metrics and that evaluation, it's all really technical, but it is possible, I think, to do that, then there's a huge opportunity for us. And actually, people think that getting this stuff done in the City of London is easy. It's really not. Multi-million pounds clients are just as tricky as £10,000 clients to get money from for engagement. And I think so making the argument in the language that they understand is a really useful information to have in this document, using the NPPF and all the other planning levers that we're all really familiar with. But of course, the NPPF has social sustainability in there as much as it has environmental and economic, and that's where we need to be heading with this stuff. Yeah, but actually, there's another. Sorry, go on.
No, I'm just going to say it's interesting in the comments. someone has raised the comment, Nina, that this isn't just about large scale developments, though, where they're more sophisticated and about doing this kind of work. They know that they need to. There's always some budget set aside for that. But what about the smaller scale type projects and case studies where it is a little bit of a harder sell, like, you know, regional builders, let's say, or even localized businesses who deliver these things? You know, how do we address it with clients like that?
Well, if they're building housing, then they'll be under local authority housing development presumptions as well, obligations as well, and there'll be a social value bit of that tender, or there'll be some sort of public benefit obligation on their planning application. And although they're building housing, which has a public benefit inherent in the permission, of course, it may be a tiny watching brief. Doesn't mean that you can't tell the locals who live next door what you're doing, and exactly what Bruce said, why you're there. We didn't find anything. I'm sorry, there's no Iron Age chariot burial in your village, but there are some further afield, or whatever however you want to communicate the archaeology to the locals. It doesn't have to be site specific if that's the way you want to play it. I think local schools, however you choose, the fact is that you've, as Amanda said at the very beginning, you've thought about the process, and you've considered it in your project design, and the developer knows that you want to do this, and they know that you are planning on doing it, and you and the curator are planning on doing it together. And then that's really powerful combination, I think, of aims to communicate to them.
Yes, absolutely. So Nina and any others who are having the same question, you know, no matter where they are in the country, they'll be under planning obligations, and the planning archaeologists, wherever you are, should be across this and be able to help you if you come up against a situation where there's a developer completely unwilling, or, you know, some other situation that you need help navigating. So in the interest of time, we do want to leave some time for questions, but I think it's really important to talk about what could be next for the toolkit. Obviously, all of you are going to start using it and start sharing it with others that you feel should be using it. But what's missing from this one, Jessica and Amanda, what's missing from this one that might be coming next? We've also seen some questions and comments on the sidebar about, training courses or CPD. You know, what are the next stages, if any, or what would you like to see happen?
Do you want to kick off, Jessica?
Yeah, well, I think the SIG are really happy to see it launched and looking forward to, you know, seeing it in practice. But I think we're really, you know, hoping that it will grow. It will grow with input and feedback as soon as people start using it and coming up with, you know, ideas that weren't around at its inception or weren't part of the initial project brief. You know, with feeding back into it, it can become an evolving resource, and that way we can continue to address the issues that arise on commissioning community engagement.
That's a really fantastic observation, actually. You know, it is a live tool, and the legislative environment and the funding environment is constantly changing. You know, like we could have a very big change depending on what happens with government and stuff this year. So keeping it open for the next stages to be able to respond to the changing sort of landscape that we're in and playing field is a really important part of doing this work. Amanda, your reflections.
I think getting it in front of people, there's definitely areas, and actually we knew and made a decision early on in the process to not try and do everything at once and rush things too much, because, you know, we felt like these were the areas that really needed some help right now. There'll be loads of additional things that could be added on, and that's where that feedback's really useful. To get the best feedback, we need people to use it, and I think there's going to be people that will come to events like this that will just see the words and be interested and enthused and want to kind of hear more and use it. But there will be others that won't. And I think that's where we need to look at dissemination and sharing and just getting people, getting it in front of people. And if there's ways, if when you are working with stuff and find that there isn't the thing that you need to be able to put it in front of your client in a simple way, then again, kind of feedback to the group and the SIG in order to help build that into another.
So that's a really good point. If people go out there and they're starting to use it, or let's say when our colleagues go out there and are starting to use the toolkit, where can they feedback if there's a particular situation or something they feel that could be more useful or that they need to address? Jessica, is there a SIG contact that they should use? Is it CIfA more generally? You know, should we have a conference session next year potentially on, you know, things that people have encountered? What are your thoughts on that? What's the best way to feedback?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, because I think there's more coming to, promoting and working around this resource. And I know CIfA and the SIG are working quite hard at looking at the next steps for promotion, and that could include, a better place for recording this feedback and feeding back initially. But yeah, I think in the first instance, it's a good idea to get it out there and let people have a go and see, if by use they can. Work out lots of ideas to feed back, and hopefully we'll have a good place to record them and to act on them in agreement with the CIfA.
Yes, of course. Excellent. Well, we've come to the end of our sort of scheduled comments. So now we're looking for questions. So anyone out there listening, if you'd like to ask a question of the panel or anyone specifically, please do drop it in the chat now. And while we're waiting for the questions to come through, my final question to the panel is, what are your main takeaways, guys? Sadie, you go first.
I'll go first. I mean, I'm a big fan of this, as you know, but I think a lot of this is actually up to us as a sector now to get our heads around and start actually doing it. I really understand, because I am a contracting archaeologist for a long time, why we feel backed into a corner a lot of the time and restricted by planning policy and our subcontractor kind of nature of what we do. But we also know, as everyone's alluded to, that this work is critical to make sure that we have a profession, and that the public benefit from it. So this is a new direction we're embarking on. We're always embarking on new directions. So machining trenches is an unknown. So this is a bit of a known unknown, I feel, and I think this toolkit's reduced loads of the unknowns in the public engagement field, really. So I think it's fantastic.
Excellent. Bruce.
Yeah, it's a massive opportunity. I think as a profession we go through this way of expanding what we do, etc. This is the next step. We need to get this right. We should get it right. This incredibly professional, hardworking group that I'm talking to today, and we should be celebrating and expounding the work that you're all delivering on a day-to-day basis. So it will take the profession to the next level. I think I echo what Sadie says there. This will demonstrate the value of what everyone's doing.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Yeah, Amanda.
I think we could use this as a real challenge, actually, because I think where we've struggled in our jobs is to be given those opportunities and to kind of have to kind of fight and find your way into a project to say, this is what I want to do. I want to do some public engagement. Can I do some? And asking permission within certain projects. And that goes kind of all the way through to the stuff we've been talking about in terms of procurement. I think certainly the thing that I'm going to start using it to is to point people at it and say, why isn't public engagement in that requirement? Or why haven't you asked me to cost around public engagement and benefit, especially around contracts that really should or should be obliged to include public engagement works. So I'm going to use it as a bit of a challenge to others wherever I can.
Fantastic. And finally, Jessica.
I think my main takeaway from this is, obviously, like I said, the SIG are really happy to see it launched. And personally, I think we have the tools for success here, and it's up to us to utilize them to build better outcomes for our local communities and the wider public, so they can be involved with archaeology meaningfully and understand the process by which all of their sites are monitored or protected or excavated. It's about involving people.
Oh, perfect. And there haven't been any questions coming through, but there's another point being made in the chat around sort of intrapreneurial leadership within our own organizations. Not all commercial units or anyone else delivering archaeology will be saying, we really need to plan this in. So as much as advocating outside of the profession, we need to be advocating within our own teams to give someone the time to properly scope this out, to properly be involved in making sure that there's a good plan. So that is an internal resource issue. So as well as advocating outside of our own profession, we need to be advocating inside to our leadership and to the people actually executing the work on behalf of businesses, that this needs to be planned in. So that was an excellent point made. Looks like, someone would like to know how to join the Community Archaeology SIG.
Yay!
Yay! I think, well, calls go out for members to join the Community Archaeology Committee in the CIfA bulletins, but to join the special interest group as just a general member, you can just do that through the CIfA website. So if you navigate to the groups page on the CIfA website, it should give you all the information that you need to join the group, and then should give you information towards signposting towards joining the committee if you want to be part of that too.
And you don't have to be a CIfA member to be a member of the CIfA groups as well. So there's not that specific barrier for that one.
We've also had a question from Jenny Emmett around seeing pushback as to whether it meets the statutory test for planning conditions necessary, especially for smaller projects. How have people successfully answered this?
It basically it is as long as it's proportionate, then we haven't seen any pushback. So it's all about that key phrase and the interpretation of it. Generally, if you scale the conditions accordingly, if it's a program of work and then this is included within the WSIs, for instance, the reporting through OASIS, we've never had a conversation at the front end with an applicant or one of your clients going, right, so one of our main concerns is OASIS reporting. They don't care. It's from their point of view, it's a way of getting them what they're meant to be doing off the books. This is another mechanism in terms of that dissemination of the knowledge that's being gained. Is another way of facilitating that. So there's arguments that are rehearsed arguments that can be had. But I think this goes back to, and apologies of can't remember who raised it now in the comments, but in terms of the case studies for the smaller bits as well, is going, actually, this is how it was implemented at a small scale, single watching brief, for instance, under the planning conditions that were set upon it, and this was the positives we've had from it. But I think there will be pushback and challenges for a start, but as it goes on, it will become easier because of the positives that the client will experience. So hopefully it will become easier, but certainly at the moment we haven't seen any successful challenges under the planning legislation.
I've got a good one in the question that's just come up. Does the panel agree that companies should build up an internal fund from revenue so that they can meet clients halfway in terms of covering costs or in-kind contributions?
I mean, I can do that if you like. Is this into archaeological companies, presumably? Is that what that's referring to? Yeah.
I think so, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose it would depend what the developer was developing, but generally I would say absolutely no. Because they're the ones who are going to make all the profit from the development, whatever that might be. Even social housing, we know, makes an absolute fortune for the people that build it. I live in shared ownership property, which I spend a fortune on and somebody else makes money from. So no, I think if you're the developer and you're making money from development, you should absolutely fulfill your obligations to the local community and use archaeology as part of that.
Excellent. And I would also add here that value in kind usually boils down to our personal time. So, that undervalues the profession when, we just sort of agree to do it because if we don't, unfunded, let's say, it won't happen. So it is about positioning this as something absolutely integral to the process and maintaining that should be planned in financially as well as in terms of logistics from the beginning.
Yes. Yeah. And I was going to say earlier, actually, that I really hope that this sees some sort of investment in people like Jessica who work in this space, because it's such a critical specialism that we traditionally have hugely underfunded. And I think it would be really great to see some proper thought about how we can support the people that do this work as well, actually.
We have a question from Narman around whether or not this toolkit can be used for overseas archaeological projects. Might be too early to talk about these things, or maybe it can be used once it gets approved, but something to think about. Manda and Jessica, what was the international intention for this toolkit, if any?
I think it was developed as a CIfA toolkit, and CIfA is not specifically UK, so you can join CIfA from other areas. You don't have to live in the UK to be a professional archaeologist, and there are international members. It's absolutely freely available to anybody to use, so anybody working internationally, if it's relevant to the work that people are doing and can be used, and I suspect some elements of it might be worked slightly outside of archaeology, could work in kind of heritage adjacent areas as well. there are a couple, or I think one international group, so there would be an arena to kind of go through more directly, and I would imagine that it will be broadcast through European Association for Archaeology conference coming up quite soon as well. There's nothing to stop anybody using it, if that makes sense. In terms of international dissemination, I'm not sure. Jessica may know more about kind of future plans, but
well, I can certainly say to Norman that a lot of the tools and the worksheets and the structured exercises within the toolkits will be useful to you in planning your own activity. So it's useful to you in that way, whether or not it can be used to advocate within however archaeology is happening in every country, which has different legislative contexts and funding mechanisms and structures of the profession, et cetera, how archaeology happens. But it will at least help you with the language and understanding of how to advocate for including this kind of work. So do have a look through and hopefully, and let us know, all of us are online and you can't avoid dig ventures online. So if you have any success or have any further questions about how to deploy this, please do reach out on social media and let us know, and we'll see if we can help you with that in the future. And that offers out to anybody as well. As we're rolling this out and as you're all starting to use it, I'm certainly happy to take any further sort of questions and comments and contacts online on LinkedIn or wherever else you can find me. So,
and I would just add to that as well. Sorry, Lisa. In terms of one of the supporting documents is the Algeo guidance that. Feel free, I'm the author of it, so if I can say this and it's been recorded, nick whatever you want and reuse it, whatever you want across the world, spread the word. It's there for everyone. I'm not going to be precious about this. This is a far bigger concept than anything in terms of my name on a document randomly. But also in terms of that feedback element that we touched on before as well, I'm also happy to take feedback as well. If you want to have a moan about something or run an idea past me, I might not have the answer, but I was certainly willing to listen and help where I can. So.
Superb. And so I think that's just about us out of time. We, thank you all to the panel and to everyone who's joined the discussion today and added comments and questions in the chat. We will be, again, online and findable for any further questions. And I'd also like to mention that we are going to be having another event actually in June on another topic as part of the sort of DV trends discussion. On Deep Time, the collective intelligence and the search for our past. This is a big project we've just done with the National Trust, looking at using Earth observation data and training citizen scientists to use that to identify archaeological features. So that's a really exciting project. The results from that are absolutely amazing. So anyone who's interested in landscape archaeology, citizen participation, and Earth observation data, this one is for you. We will be joined by National Trust team members, as well as some of the folks who took part in that project. So thanks again to all of you who came today and participated in the discussion. Read the toolkit. Let us know how it's working for you. Every comment that we get back will help us continue to make that a usable and valuable resource. So thanks again and enjoy the rest of your days.